Good evening and welcome again to Ideas at Work and Beyond. We have an incredible debate this evening. The 5th Congressional District on the Republican side. And really for the first time in a long time, the Republicans are vying for a spot that could be had. And the three gentlemen that have joined us this evening, one served as mayor of Waterbury and put on himself his own term limits. Another, probably the most handsome of the three, Justin Bernier, was actually an Iraq war veteran, and he has been put in harm's way for our freedom. And Mark Greenberg, maybe of all three, has met a payroll and knows what it means to make money in the private sector. The Republican Party has an embarrassment of riches when it comes to quality men that can do us well in Washington, D.C. Tonight is August 4th. The primary is August 10th. So we are down to it. These men have been on TV shows, they've kissed babies, they've been at church fairs, they've done everything. They've almost gone to blows. If you've seen some of these ads, these guys are, it's getting rough. And you know what? That's what our democracy is all about. Because in America, there's a competition of ideas, and if you don't got the stomach and you don't like contact sports, then don't run for public office in this country, because that's how we vet our candidates. And we are proud to have three fine young, medium-aged men here tonight. And they are going to have a debate. And we're going to start the debate with a 2-minute opening statement. Then we're taking calls. We already have one caller on hold right now. We also have some man-on-the-street people that have asked some questions as well. So you will have an opportunity to call in or ask these candidates questions, and I'm very excited about tonight. So, through a complete chance draw, we chose the order. And this evening, I'd like to introduce Sam Caligiuri, and you have the first 2-minute opening statement.
Marty, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to be on the show and for doing this. And you know what? I've got to tell you, I'm very lucky to be in this race and to be the party-endorsed candidate with two outstanding candidates like Justin Bernier and Mark Greenberg. We've had a contentious race at times, but we all share in our goal, and the goal is to beat Chris Murphy. Let me just make 2 points. Ultimately, for a Republican primary perspective, this question is, which one of us is in the best position to beat Chris Murphy? I believe the strongest candidate is going to have the right combination of strength on the issues and political strength. I believe I offer our best combination of strengths to beat Chris Murphy. I believe that's one of the reasons why I won the convention as convincingly as I did. There's nothing more important from an issues perspective than getting our economy turned around. We can't do that unless we bring some fiscal responsibility back to Washington. I would do that in 2 ways. One, by making sure the stimulus doesn't become a permanent part of the federal budget, and number 2, by putting tough enforceable spending caps in place on the entire federal budget so that we can start to get federal spending under control. That way we can then cut taxes, which is the only way to really stimulate the economy. From a political perspective, I'm the only guy in this race who's had to win tough elections, and I've done it in some of the worst environments we've seen for Republicans. I'm a conservative Republican representing a Democratic district, and I won in '06 and then again in '08, and I couldn't have done it unless I was able to win not just Republican votes, but unaffiliated and conservative Democrats. That's why I believe I'm the strongest candidate, and that's why I'm happy to be here, and I ask your viewers for their vote on August 10th.
Thank you. Justin?
Thanks, Marty, for having this debate. We haven't had enough debates during this primary, so this is actually very important that we do this. Danbury is a very important town. It's the biggest city in the district, and the voters are going to have a big say on August 10th. I'm running because I believe that America is sliding right now. Like a lot of Americans, I believe we're in trouble. And if we don't do something differently very soon, we're going to continue that slide of joblessness and increased national debt and a lack of competitiveness. And what I want to do is bring a plan for prosperity to Washington. We need to get down taxes. We need to get down spending. We need health care that makes sense. We need to repeal Obamacare, replace it with common sense solutions. And we need an all-of-the-above energy policy, not cap and trade. You know, the politicians right now are telling us we have to be happy with a jobless recovery. And a jobless recovery is like a foodless meal. It's like a roofless house. It doesn't make any sense. And they're telling us that we have to do this. It's really a mask for their failures. The politicians in Washington and in Hartford have failed to create a pro-business environment where we can actually have job creation. So my first goal when I go down to Congress is going to be to not only get down the national debt, but to build a better business environment so that America can create jobs and we can have prosperity again.
Thank you. Mark?
Marty, thanks for inviting us. I really draw a sharp contrast between myself and my fine candidates. For 35 years, I've been creating jobs in my business. For 35 years, I've written my name on the front of a payroll check, not on the back. For 35 years, unlike the federal deficit, the federal government, I balanced budgets for a lot of entities year after year for 35 years. My fine gentlemen sitting next to me, they're career politicians or they want to be career politician. Sam has been involved with Waterbury as an alderman for years, and then acting mayor, and then state senator right now. Justin has been a staffer for both Rel and Rob Simmons. So I don't have that background. I can't say that I've been making decisions in the political arena, but I've made tremendous decisions, I believe, in the business arena. I've been a product of the American dream, and I want to assure that that American dream is available for my children and their generation.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Appreciate your opening statements. Our first caller is calling in on the 203-438-2003 line. Caller, your question for the candidates. Caller, are you there? Your question. Go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I was curious as to where the different candidates stand on the issue of the earmarks. I know that there's a lot of reckless spending going on in Washington, and some people say the earmarks are worthwhile. Other people say that they're all wasteful by their very nature. I was curious to see where each individual candidate stands on the issue of earmarks, whether or not they have merit ever, and if you disagree with them, what you would do to fight them when you're in Washington.
Excellent question. Thank you for holding. So we'll start with you, Sam.
Sure.
Your issue on earmarks.
I would support banning earmarks in Washington, and the reason for it is an earmark is a decision by Congress that overrides the executive branch's authority to decide how to spend money. And one of the problems with earmarks is that it not only promotes waste, but it really furthers political corruption, because the way it so often works is that you have to trade your vote in Washington for something you may or may not believe in for bringing pork back home to your district. Now, part of a congressman's obligations is to bring resources back home, but there's a better way to do it than the current earmarking system. We need to do it through a competitive grant-making process, a competitive vetting process, where you go in and you advocate for the quality of your project based on the merit of your project, and not because you've had to trade your vote for something that you may or may not believe in order to bring pork back home to your district. There's a better way to do it, so I would fight to ban the current earmarking system in Washington.
Excellent. Justin?
Marty, from day one, I pledged to ban earmarks. I'm not going to do them. This has been a major part of my campaign. There is a right way to bring money back to the district, and there's a wrong way to do it. Now, I've made that pledge early on. Sam Caligiuri in Hartford did many earmarks. You supported $3.5 million for a water park expansion, $500,000 for a golf course construction, and $125,000 for a skateboard park. So you can say that you're against earmarks, but Sam's also saying there are no earmarks in Hartford. That, to me, is crazy, because right now we're looking at our bond rating as a state has been dropped to AA because we have been paying for earmarks with bond money. So I'm telling you tonight, I'm not doing earmarks in Washington. I know there are earmarks in Hartford, and there's certainly those in Washington, and I'm going to fight to stop it.
All right, Mark, and then you can...
Justin, you're a new father of Renee, and congratulations to that. But Lake Compounce is a great place to go. I take my kids there all the time. It really is.
We'll go together sometime.
That sounds good. With regard to earmarks,
Call, are you there?
let's call it what it really is. Earmarks are bribes. That's what the person on the street would call them. It's simply selling a project for a vote. And I would agree with these gentlemen that earmarks have no place in Congress. If we all brought earmarks, 435 of us brought them back to our districts, we'd be even more broke at the federal level than we are now, if that's possible. So I would agree with these fellows on that.
All right, Sam, your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
There was a bit of a shot across the bow there. And
You think?
By the way, in
I'm used to it.
this debate, we encourage rebuttals. No physical violence, but rebuttals.
No, actually, you know, the bonding bills that Justin refers to aren't earmarks, because ultimately it's the governor and the state bond commission that decides whether that money ever gets expended. That's the critical difference between the bonding bills in Hartford that Justin criticizes me for having supported and an earmark in Washington. And the fact is, when Justin was the director of the Office of Military Affairs, he supported $40 million in state bond funds in order to upgrade the infrastructure at the submarine base in Groton. And the fact is, that was a worthwhile expenditure because it was the governor that ultimately made the decision whether to spend that money. That wasn't an earmark any more than the projects that I've supported are in Hartford, because it was the governor that decided whether to spend that money, not the legislature. That's the critical difference.
All right, just real
I
quick.
want to respond to that because that was not an earmark, Sam. In fact, you voted for that, and by law, I was required to invest in the submarine base to make sure that it doesn't close and the state lose 30,000 jobs and $1.5 billion in economic activity per year. So that's just not true. That's not an earmark. When you want to spend $3.5 million on a water park, though, and $125,000 for a skate park, and $500,000 for golf course instruction, now that's an earmark. When you spend money to keep the submarine base from leaving Connecticut and costing us 30,000 jobs and billions of dollars in economic activity, and you voted for that, and it's in the law, that isn't an earmark. So there's a big distinction. I think the people in Connecticut know what the difference is, and I think they know that there are earmarks in Hartford, just as there are in Washington. It needs to stop.
Let me just introduce our think tank this evening. We have an august, intelligent, experienced group that's here. We have Al Robinson. He is the founder and publisher of Hat City Blog. Strikes terror into the hearts of politicians all around Connecticut. We have Jim Bolano, who is a assistant professor at WestConn University, and we have Dave Straight. Dave has a website, and he knows about all things financial. But we want to start with Al Robinson. You have a question for the candidates.
Yes, I was going to ask a question, but I'm going to hold off on that for now because you brought up the topic of earmarks. I'm going to talk about something that's specific to the 5th Congressional District. As you know, a lot of people have a lot of concerns about Interstate 84. I've been living in this area for over 20 years, and one thing I hear is about Interstate 84 being a real pain, especially from, let's say, Meriden all the way down to the New York borderline. You said you're all against earmarks. How would you address the transportation problems without dealing with it in terms of an earmark, in terms of bringing back money to help fix the highway system in our area?
Okay, Mark, why don't we start with you on that question?
Well, I believe that the highway system in Connecticut is financed by state dollars, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that.
Well, there are federal and state roads and county roads and town roads, so it all depends.
Yeah, but I believe that the bonding, for instance, for the expansion of I-84 through Waterbury, which hasn't been accomplished after probably 15 years, was a state project. And now I think it's still on hold for that 5 or 6 miles. Yeah. So this is a problem. This is a problem. But what we have to do is we have to get the finance of the state under control. We have a $3.5 to $4 billion deficit that we're looking at for the next 2 years, which is way out of control. It's 20% of the budget. So we have to get the financial house in order in Connecticut before we deal with expensive projects. That's just the way it works. We on Main Street spend money when we have money in the account. We have to learn to have the discipline to spend money in Connecticut when we have money in the account.
Justin?
Well, it's a very good question, and there's a big difference between highway money and an earmark. Highway money would be an example of something that goes through the normal appropriations process. Both sides, the House and the Senate, approve it through the Department of Transportation and something like a water park. And the voters know what the difference is there. Now, I want to keep more of the money in Connecticut. So there's no reason for us to always be sending all the money down to Washington and then bringing it back here to do highway money. Let's keep the money in Connecticut. Let's let the state handle as much of this as possible. And of course, we're going to bring money back to Connecticut for these types of projects. But that's not an example of an earmark. That's an example of a worthy infrastructure project.
Sam, you're nodding your head.
Well, no, I agree. I mean, I think the answer, Al, is we need to pass a transportation bill, which is languishing right now in the Congress. And, you know, one of the functions of the federal government needs to be to protect and maintain our national infrastructure. Our roads and highways are critical to that. So we need to pass a transportation bill, and I agree with Justin that the transportation bill isn't an earmark because it ultimately goes through the normal appropriations process signed by the president, and there's no political horse trading the way the earmarking system promotes. So that's the way we solve that problem, in my judgment, Al.
Okay, we have a caller on the phone. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you had a question for the candidates.
Yes, I do. I'd like to know how they feel about the fact that we have a real problem with illegal aliens in Connecticut and in the country, and I want to know, what do they feel is the right thing to do about the illegal alien problem in the country, also the border, also the DREAM Act, and also all the other types of amnesty that the present administration is trying to push through.
Excellent question. Thank you so much for holding. Mark, we'll start with you. By the way, the DREAM Act, correct me if I'm wrong, is if it's a child of illegal immigrants, they still get state-funded scholarships for state schools. I believe that's the gist of the DREAM Act. Go ahead.
Well, I'm a believer that we're a nation of laws, and we have to abide by the notion that people need to come into this country legally, not illegally. If people have come into this country illegally, we have to deal with it with the laws that are present. I'm a supporter of the Arizona law, which is essentially a law which is trying to enforce the federal law. At the federal level, they're not enforcing the laws properly. By the way, just last week, I met a fellow, and this is incredible. He's a legal resident with a green card. He's been trying to get his citizenship for 20 years.
Yeah.
20 years. So what we have to do is we have to streamline the process of getting into this country legally. We need people into this country. We're reproducing at only the rate of 1.66 per couple. We have to reproduce at 2.1 per couple to sustain our population. So I believe that we should streamline legal immigration, and we should deal properly with people who come in illegally.
Okay. Justin.
Marty, we're a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. And it's very important that we enforce our immigration laws. And the U.S. isn't doing that. And I think there's a great frustration out there with voters. And I'm frustrated myself that we have a government that doesn't want to enforce its own laws. Our immigration laws are, first and foremost, a big problem in that regard. And secondly, we got to enforce the border. We've got a porous border. It's been that way for too long. The American people made clear they want to enforce the border. They don't want to have gaps in the fence. They want people to come in an orderly way, get in line, and become citizens in a rational process. Unfortunately, that's not happening right now, and it's a big source of concern.
Sam?
We need to secure our borders. We need to enforce existing law. We need to make sure that we don't look the other way as a government at businesses that hire illegally, and that's been a big part of the problem, that the federal government has looked the other way and has allowed businesses to hire folks who are here illegally, and we need to crack down on employers who do that. The third thing we need to do is make sure that we don't go ahead and sue states like Arizona who are just trying to do the job the federal government ought to do. I came out strongly against the Obama administration for its lawsuit against the state of Arizona. I said clearly that if the federal government was doing their job in the first place, that states like Arizona wouldn't feel the need to go ahead and plug the gap the way they have in that state. And I think it's misplaced priorities and resources on the part of the Obama administration to be suing Arizona. They ought to take those resources and enforce our laws in the first place. And finally, I would oppose amnesty. And as a state senator, I've opposed legislation to provide in-state tuition assistance to the children of illegal immigrants. Because I don't think, as a matter of policy, we ought to be creating a perverse economic incentive for people to come here illegally. And we have too many examples of where we've actually incentivized people to come here illegally. We need to stop that, along with securing our borders and enforcing our laws.
Okay, caller, you're on the air. Do you have a question for the candidates?
Yes, I do. My question is regarding health care. Obviously, that's a very hot issue right now, but to me, it seems like a very large part of this could be solved by tort reform because an amazing amount of expenses is spent there. What do each of you feel, about tort reform?
Thank you. Very good question. Now, Sam, you're a lawyer, right?
Yes.
So why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts on tort reform?
Well, I'm happy to report that I'm not a trial lawyer. I'm actually a business lawyer.
You're the good guy.
Yeah,
Okay.
I spend time working with business people like Mark Greenberg, helping them to grow their businesses, do deals, actually grow the economy. That's the kind of law I practice. But I think tort reform has to be part of the equation. You can't have a conversation with a doctor who doesn't talk to you about how the skyrocketing cost of medical malpractice is driving up the cost of medicine, driving up the cost that they have to incur, pass on to consumers, and also forcing them to practice medicine so defensively that it's increasing the cost across the board. So that has to be part of the solution. But there are a number of other things we can do. I support tax credits for small business to provide health insurance to their employees, because the reality is most of the uninsured work, and most of those people work for the smallest employers in Connecticut. So we need to make it more economically feasible and achievable for small business to provide health insurance to their employees. That's something we can do. Levelizing the tax treatment for folks who buy in the individual market versus the group market is another important change we can make. And finally, for folks who are otherwise uninsurable, we shouldn't be increasing the Medicaid eligibility, which is a huge entitlement we already can't afford. We ought to be creating a high-risk pool underwritten by private insurers so that people have insurance as a last resort. Those are all things that we can do to make insurance more accessible, to help to control costs, including tort reform, and you can do all of that with increasing the size of the federal government. I'm proud to have signed the Club for Growth's pledge saying that if I get elected to Congress, when I get elected to Congress, I'm going to vote to repeal the takeover bill that Chris Murphy and Nancy Pelosi crammed down our throats, and to defund it if we need to.
That takeover of healthcare did not have tort reform, and the trial lawyers were big donors to Barack Obama. Call me cynical, I smell a rat. Your thoughts?
2,700-page bill. You can't even look over it if it's on the table in front of you. Not one page in it for tort reform. Now, we've been trying to get tort reform, the voters have down in Congress, for a very, very long time. It has been coming. Both parties have resisted it. And I think a good part of that reason is that we have a Congress that's 50% lawyers, and they have lawyer supporters. Now, I don't want to attack lawyers here. They're good people. We do need some lawyers in Congress. But we also need other types of people in Congress. We need veterans in Congress. We need people with a background in economics in Congress. We need businessmen in Congress. We need farmers in Congress. We need the House of Representatives to be representative. Right now it's not. And that's why the American people aren't getting what they want out of Congress today. It's a clubby environment. It's a lot of people that have resisted tort reform over the years. We didn't get it under Republicans. We didn't get it under Democrats. And frankly, I don't think we're going to get it in the next Congress if we don't send people down there that see things differently.
Mark?
Well, tort reform is absolutely necessary. In this country, you could be sued and are sued for anything, even meritless lawsuits. So we definitely have to do something about tort reform, and it definitely adds a layer of cost that we need to get rid of. Sam talked about Club for Growth. We probably signed that the same day, more or less. We were very quick to sign that. Probably Justin did, I don't know, but we're all against the Obamacare, as we call it. It's 2,700 pages of disaster. And one of my positions is that if a bill is 2,500 pages, you should shred it. It's too long, it's too complicated, it adds too much bureaucracy, too much cost.
Mr. Greenberg, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think what Nancy Pelosi said is we should pass the bill so we can know what was in the bill.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi said some odd things at times, to say the least. One thing that we're going to do, whoever it is who comes out of this primary, along with other Republicans, is we're going to retire her from the majority seat.
On that note, we'll go to Jim Bolano from West Con University. Jim?
I thought that the previous caller had stolen my thunder on immigration, but I want to get back to immigration. Because I'm hearing a lot about secure the border, enforce the law, crack down on businesses, E-Verify. That's all fine and good. But it seems to me the two big questions with that, I'd like to know where you stand on it. The two big parts that will be part of any immigration reform are, number one, is this anchor baby issue. What do you do about illegal aliens that give birth to the United States and the relationship of that child to the 14th Amendment protection? And number two, Sam, you said you were against amnesty, but what are you going to do with the 11 to 20 million, whatever that number is, that are here? You're going to send them back? You're going to deport them? You're going to have trains going out of the country? You're going to give amnesty, road to citizenship? It's still amnesty. So I'd just like to know your position on those two.
All right, Sam, we'll start with you.
Well, those are good questions, and they're very difficult questions to answer. But the fact is I don't support amnesty, and the practical answer is that I would support deporting as many folks as we realistically can, because I don't think that we should reward people for having come here illegally. That is the fundamental premise that I operate from. In any system that ends up rewarding people for coming here illegally is something that we need to resist as powerfully as is realistic.
Well, let me ask you, because I think Mark Greenberg brought up a good point. He knows someone that's been trying for 21, 22 years, doing it right, going through the system, and the system isn't responding.
Well, but that's why we need to make sure that, to the extent that we need to liberalize our existing immigration laws for folks who are trying to play by the rules, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't be liberalizing on the back end for folks who broke the rules altogether. I mean, that's what I consistently call the perverse economic incentive here. So any policy that creates an incentive for people or a reward for people to come here illegally, no matter how difficult the practical issues may be associated with dealing with them once they're here, is something we need to resist at every turn. And for folks who are playing by the rules, to the extent that we have a need to bring them in for segments of our economy, let's do it through a legal path, having come in that way, and not rewarding people who are already here illegally.
Justin?
Right. Well, Congress right now is looking at this anchor baby issue, and they ought to, because that's not what the constitutional amendment was put in there to prevent. Now, a lot of people are attacking the Arizona bill. The Arizona bill, and as I mentioned, I'm not a lawyer, but I am able to read that short bill, and I understand what it says. It doesn't say anything about rounding up people. What it does is enforce current immigration law. And that's what Americans are looking for today. They want to see the law enforced. And so long as it's not enforced, we're going to continue to have frustrated individuals, frustrated governments on the border, and they're going to pass these laws.
Mr. Kramer?
Well, getting back to this fellow who's been trying to get trying to be a U.S. citizen for 20 years, it's not due to the liberalization of the laws that he's dealing with. He's dealing with the bureaucracy of big government. The most recent reason why he couldn't get his citizenship is he had the photograph that had a side view versus a front view. This is incredible stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be getting a statement from him, and I will be publishing it. So we must make it more streamlined for these folks to get in this country. We want people to come in legally. We do. Now, again, we have to abide by the laws that are in effect. And I hate to agree with Sam. Sometimes we don't agree. But he's right. We cannot reward illegal behavior. Then folks will continue to do it. You can't do it. This is a nation of laws.
All right, caller, thank you for waiting. What's your question for the candidates? Call it. Yeah, go right ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm a truck driver, and I'm having trouble getting work these days because all the businesses I used to work for are moving out of the state and going to other states. So I'm wondering, what are you going to do to keep jobs in Connecticut? And, what are we going to do to make companies want to move here instead of wanting to leave?
Did you see that article in the paper where the governor is whining and dining those hedge fund guys? Did you see that? Caller?
No, I didn't see it. No.
It's good. I think she's trying to say Connecticut's open for business. But thank you. Thank you for the call. We'll ask the candidates. What about that? How do we make Connecticut more business friendly? Mark, you're a businessman. You signed the front, the check, the back, the check.
Front, back, you name it.
Of the check.
Yeah.
How do we do
Well, let me tell you, I've been speaking to folks 12 hours a day. That's why I have a tan that I do.
Yeah.
And I speak to these businesses day in, day out, and they tell me, you got to change the attitude of this government. This is not a business-friendly state.
Yeah.
We are the worst tax state probably in the nation. We have every imaginable tax.
Yeah.
We have personal property tax. We now have the income tax from 1991, the temporary income tax from 1991. We have various business entity tax, pay out $250 for the privilege of losing money in this state. There are folks who are in business barely by luck alone. They're hoping to build a future or a bridge to the future where they can survive. They're putting out money from their own pockets to survive. We have to fix this government that spends and spends and spends and overtaxes its citizens. That's what we have to do. We have to create a better environment. There are over 200 taxes from which we collect only $20 million or so. Let's just get rid of all these taxes. It doesn't make sense. The administrative cost of collecting these taxes is greater than what you're collecting.
Yeah.
We must become more competitive with our 49 other competitors.
Absolutely. Justin?
Cost of fuel, cost of energy, It's a big deal. It's pushing companies right outside of Connecticut. It's killing our manufacturers. The cap and trade bill that was passed in the House of Representatives, we need to make sure that does not go into effect. I have differences with Sam Caligiuri on that bill. There was also a bill, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, that he voted for in Connecticut, which will lead to higher prices because it's going to result in higher costs for electricity. It already has. Fuel costs, Sam, you voted for the diesel tax increase. That's something that's directly related to that truck driver. He's got to pay for gas. And the higher the cost of the gasoline is, the harder it is for him to make a profit. I believe energy costs ought to be the lowest we can possibly get them. We need an all-of-the-above energy policy. We need to be cutting taxes on all sorts of energy, whether it's fuel. We certainly don't need any cap-and-trade taxes at the regional level or at the federal level. Make no mistake about it, the cap-and-trade bill that was passed by the Hartford legislature, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, calls itself a cap-and-trade bill, the first mandatory one in the United States.
Excellent. Sam, what about that? You have just been painted as a high-tax, anti-business guy. He's standing right. He's a big fella. He's been in the military.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, obviously not. And I want to go back and actually answer the question. I mean, the fact is, you know, I'm the only one of the three of us here who's been endorsed by the oldest pro-business organization in Washington, BIPAC, as one of only 19 candidates around the country that they've endorsed because of my strong pro-business record. In the state Senate, I was endorsed by the Connecticut Business and Industry Association both times that I've been there because I've resisted every job-killing piece of legislation that's come down the pike that they've cared about. So I've been very strong on pro-business issues, but to actually answer your caller's question, from a federal perspective, there's nothing more important than getting our economy growing again, and that's how I started all of this. I think the single biggest way to do it is to have broad-based tax cuts. Start by making the Bush tax cuts permanent so that we eliminate the uncertainty that so many businesses are experiencing today about what's going to happen to their tax rates. Then we need to cut the corporate tax rate, which is the second highest in the industrialized world, and we need to cut the individual tax rate because most small businesses are formed as pass-through entities for tax purposes. So which means that their income is imputed to them as personal income. So when you cut the individual tax rate, you're actually cutting taxes for small businesses. Yeah. That's the way, from a federal policy perspective, we can answer your caller's question. That's the way. See, what we can do from a federal perspective is we can either put policies in place that help us to grow jobs or put policies in place that make it harder for businesses to grow jobs. My goal is to go to Washington and put pro-job growth policies in place that starts with spending controls and pushes tax cuts.
Okay, David Straight, he has a website called Straight Talk. Google it. There's a lot of good stuff there, and you have a question for the candidates.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. By way of disclosure, I spent the last 20 to 25 years trading oil commodities for a couple companies. I can tell you that firsthand knowledge, we are facing an energy crisis in America, and the situation was only made worse by the spill in the Gulf Coast. Interestingly enough, we shut down all the Gulf Coast drilling, and what seems to be the case at this point is that, as bad as that spill was, very little of it's now showing up. Some of the suggestions have been, with the energy crisis, is we need to pursue green energy. Green energy right now is depriving capital to projects that can produce energy today when we need it. And many of the alternative energies that people are spending money on will never produce anywhere near what we need them to produce. We import right now 10 million out of 14 million barrels a day of oil that we consume. Much of that money that we're importing, or oil that we're importing from the Middle East, a lot of those dollars end up in terrorist hands that end up coming back to hurt us. Question is, what do we do regarding the energy crisis? And I can also tell you that cap and trade would be an absolute disaster for the economy. But what do we do to get energy independence?
Excellent question. Mark, why don't we start with you?
Well, we have to start drilling again in the Gulf. We must do that. To stop based upon this disaster is a disaster in itself. We have to drill in Alaska at the Anwar. We have to drill in the Bakken Formation, which has tremendous reserves. And with oil at $50 a barrel, it makes sense for oil companies now to get that oil out of the ground again through fracturalization and other techniques I'm sure you know very well. We have to have nuclear energy. We have to become energy independent. This is what the Department of Energy was formed for in 1977. And by this date, we were supposed to be energy independent. Right. It hasn't happened. So, of course, the Department of Energy is a flop, in my opinion. But this is what we have to do. We have to become energy independent, keep these dollars off of the terrorists who are going to use these dollars against us, and do it in any way that we can.
Right. Marty, I think I just heard drill baby drill, but I'm not real sure.
I know. I mean,
DBD.
I've gone back and forth. I mean, when I saw all those Pelicans with oils on it, I was going, drill baby drill. Geez, this is a disaster. But
yeah, you know,
I guess
DBD, drill baby drill.
All right.
Well, let's drill, but let's do it in a safe way, and let's not set the oil companies up so they have to drill so far off shore in the first place. There's two parts to getting this energy crisis under control, and we are in an energy crisis still. One is you got to do an all-of-the-above energy policy, from nuclear to natural gas, everything in between, all the way down to solar, renewable energies. Let's invest in that. But number two, to invest in it, in a very capital-intensive industry like energy, you got to get investment taxes down. So let's get taxes down on investment in general, and let's see more money put into energy exploration and development. Now, on the cap-and-trade bill, I agree with you. It's 100% awful. It's going to push companies right out of the United States into places like India and China, where they're going to be less competitive and where emission standards are even less. And if you don't like the cap-and-trade system in the United States, you're not going to like the one that the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is right here in New England in the 10 states in the Northeast. It's the same bill. It was designed by the same person. It's on a smaller scale, but it has the same effect. It pushes companies and industries out of Connecticut into other places of the country and actually outside of the country as well. That is a big difference between me and Sam Caligiuri. Sam voted for that bill. I oppose the bill at the regional level and at the federal level.
Sam, respond.
Well, I'm going to start by answering the question.
Oh, come on. Why break the pattern?
Because I was going to save the best for, please.
Right, go ahead.
Please. I think we're all largely in agreement. I mean, we really do need a comprehensive policy. It starts with exploring and exploiting all of the domestically available resources. You know, you talked about your concern about the Pelicans, but one of the things that we can do as a matter of policy is allow companies like BP to have adjacent permits for adjacent wells, because if they had an adjacent well, they would have been able to do that side drilling that they needed to a lot faster than they were able to in order to cap the problem that they had in the first place. So there are little things like that that we don't talk about a lot that can be done in order to make sure that the exploration and the tapping of those resources are done in a very smart way. That's one thing. Next thing we need to do is invest very heavily in our energy infrastructure. We have an abundance of natural gas, but our ability to transmit that has been hampered by the weakness in our transmission capacity right now. So we need to make a long-term investment in increasing our transmission capacity for natural gas. That's going to help us control costs in the long term. Number three, I agree with Justin on this, we need to make sure that we have tax policies in place that incentivize us to explore alternative sources. I mean, we can't just rely on oil. We can't just rely on natural gas. That's got to be a mainstay. Mark's right about nuclear, but I do think it's worthwhile as a matter of tax policy to be investing in potential sources for the future in a way that's economically feasible. On the cap-and-trade issue, I've consistently said that I would vote against federal cap-and-trade because the evidence is absolutely replete and clear and incontrovertible, which is why it died in the Senate, that it would be a huge tax on the American public. The regional greenhouse gas bill that Justin likes to talk about every time we're together, in my judgment, was very, very different because the governor, among other things, put a safeguard in there to protect ratepayers from increases. So, you know, from my point of view, if there are things we can do to help clean up the environment and do it in a way that when we're voting on it does not appear to be anything that would increase costs for the consumers, I'm happy to support it. That's why I supported it, which, by the way, passed the Senate unanimously and near unanimously in the House of Representatives, Marty.
Well, that's, I mean, that should not be condolence to anyone that it passed unanimously in the Senate, because we passed a lot of horrible bills through Hartford. This bill is a miniature version of the larger cap-and-trade system. It is going to cost us a whole lot of money. And, you know, we have the second highest cost of electricity in the entire country right here in Connecticut. Only Hawaii is higher. And I could think of a lot of things you want to be number 2 to Hawaii in. It's not electricity prices.
Last word.
Justin's desperately trying to find anything he can hold on to differentiate
No,
himself
Sam,
from
this
me.
is a big
But
difference.
the fact of the matter is, the reason it passed unanimously is because there was no credible evidence in the record at the time that it would hurt consumers. There is no way some of the most fiscally responsible legislators in Hartford would ever support it if we thought it would hurt consumers.
All right, caller, are you there? You have a question?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
I'm sure, well, you may or may not have heard about those there's 4 freshmen, Democratic representatives that got together and were finally listening to their constituents, I guess, and they cobbled together and did a bill thing where they were going to reduce the deficit by $20 billion. And they were shouted down by the Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats were particularly tough on them. And the freshman senator from Michigan, I guess, has become their spokesperson. He's been on the talk show saying they're not letting us do what we were sent here to do. And I'm sure you remember Trent Lott's remark about, well, these Tea Party, these new guys are going to come in here from the people and we'll just co-opt them. And I was just wondering what your reaction was to that, and when, not if, but when one of you gets down there, how would you handle that type of treatment?
Great.
I'll hang up and let someone else call in.
Excellent. We're going to go the lightning round on this. Which one of you has enough spine to stand up to Washington and their free spending ways?
I
Mr.
do.
Greenberg, we'll start with you.
I do. I'm going down, or I would hope to go down, and bring my business background, 35 years of business background, and bring my independence. I don't listen to anybody. I listen to my moral principles, and my beliefs. I can't be bought by anybody. I want to spend...
My sense is this would be a cut and pay for you, wouldn't it, Mark?
Cut and pay? It would be a cut in my life because I'm not going to see my children as much. That's the most important thing that would bother me because they miss me. But the answer is that I would go down for a limited amount of time. I do not want to stay in Washington. I do not want to become a career politician. I want to make sure that I could be a very large strength down there to change things. And when I see that I've changed things, I'm out of Washington and I'm back to Connecticut. And I hope I'm back to Connecticut to a decent situation for business people.
Justin, you've worn the country's uniform and been in harm's way. Do you have enough spine to go down there and clean
Well,
up?
I've already taken an oath to the Constitution, and I'm going to pledge an oath to the constituents. I'm going to stand up, of course, to the leadership if they try to get us to do something that isn't in the best interest of America. There's no doubt about that. On term limits, the voters should know I've taken the shortest term limit pledge in this race. 10 years total, House and Senate. And I'm the youngest guy in the race.
Listen to this guy. He's already in the Senate.
Well, 10 years total in Congress.
I understand.
Not 12 years in the House.
I'll take less.
Mark, you're going to be, when your term limits expire, you'd be 78 or so.
I'd be very old.
Sam will be 68. I'm going to enjoy getting out of there before 10 years is up and going back in the private sector, because I think that this problem that we have right now in Washington, we're going to know whether or not we succeeded or failed within 10 years.
Sam?
Yeah, let me answer the question after I
think he just took a generational jab at you there. Are you going to leave that alone, or what are we doing here?
You know what? Like I said, he's desperately trying to do anything he can to hold on at the end of this race. The fact is, I've said that I'm going to serve no more than 4 two-year terms. That's 8 years. But to the question that your caller posed, I think one of the strengths that I bring to this race is that I'm the only guy who's had to stand up in the public sector and make those tough decisions. When I was the acting mayor of Waterbury, I negotiated 2 of the toughest collective bargaining agreements that city has ever seen, to the point where when I left office and ran for the state senate 4 years later, some of the labor unions were still actively trying to run against me to punish me for those tough contracts. And as a state senator, I was the only senator and the only Republican in the General Assembly to stand up and say no to the 2007-2009 state budget, to the point where one newspaper in Connecticut called me the last sane man in Hartford for that vote. So if someone is looking for someone with the proven credibility to stand up in the public arena and make the tough decisions in the face of a lot of pressure, I'm the only guy who's done it.
Okay, you're an intrepid reporter, and Al Robinson. We're out on the streets getting the pulse of the people, and we came up with some questions that they had. This gentleman is particularly poignant when he asks about, I'll just let him speak for himself. We're here on Main Street in front of the dollar store, and this gentleman has a question he'd like to put to the candidates.
Yes, what are you going to do about the people that are out of work for over the 99 weeks? I have 6 weeks left of unemployment and no place to go.
Great question. Thank you. Mark, we'll start with you. That really brings this hurting economy to a very poignant level. That was touching, talking about it.
Yes, it was. And I speak to these people all the time. However, I've always told people the truth, and honestly, they're going to hear from me principle and truth. I'm going to have to tell that person that we can't keep on extending the unemployment benefits forever. My understanding, what I see in the marketplace, is that if you keep on extending these benefits, some folks are by nature going to wait a little longer to find that job. At some point in time, we have to hope that these people look for jobs, get jobs. Some of them are going to leave the state because they can't find employment in their field in this state, and that's reality.
Justin?
Well, we can't let people go hungry and starve, but we need to look at these benefits and see if they need to be restructured, because right now, if we continue this endlessly, it's unsustainable and we'll bankrupt the country. So there's got to be some give and take, I think, on both sides. But at the end of the day, the reason why we've got this economic situation that we do is because career politicians have failed us. They have failed us outright in Hartford and Washington, D.C., and we are not going to get a different situation until we have a fresh start, send new people down there. We have got to get a better business environment. As I said, that's lower taxes. It means less government spending. It means health care reforms that make sense and lower energy costs.
Sam?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, and I think we've reached that point, we've got to decide, are we going to continue to spend the federal government's money to extend these benefits, or are we going to spend the federal government's money to cut taxes so that we can actually grow the economy again and get this man a job? I mean, that's the bottom line. We're either going to continue to fund a situation where we're going to keep having to pay these benefits out because we're not spending our money in a way that will actually grow the economy. So at some point, we've got to say no. I would have voted no on the bill, and I would have advocated taking those resources and putting them towards making the tax cuts permanent, cutting individual and corporate tax rates so that we can grow our economy again. That's the best solution for this man. Get him a job. That unemployment benefits.
Talking to him after, that's what that guy wants. He wants a job. The next man on the street question. We're in front of the Stop and Shop right here in Danbury in front of the beautiful WestConn campus, and we have a citizen who has something that she'd like to ask the candidates.
I'm tired of the war and in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I would like to know what you're doing about getting us out of there as soon as possible. The lives that are lost are, it's like Vietnam all over again. I would like to know when we're going to get out of this war.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. Excellent question. These are issues you'll be dealing with. Mark, we'll start with you, and we're in the lightning round, so we want to go through as many questions as possible and then have your closing statement.
Well, our mission in 2001 in Afghanistan was to find Osama bin Laden, bring him to justice, and two, to root out the Taliban. We failed with regard to finding him. He's not going to be found there. And with regard to the Taliban, it seems to be almost a situation where you cut off the head of Medea and two appear. It's a very difficult situation. Do I want to get out of Afghanistan? Absolutely. But we have to have a victory there. We have to do our very best to get these cells destroyed so that they can't come back and destroy us.
Justin,
well, Marty, I'm a veteran of Afghanistan from 2007. I'm the only one in this race that has any national security experience whatsoever. But what I'll talk about, I can talk about Afghanistan. I'll say that we have options there. We need to accelerate the handoff of security responsibilities. We need to do local elections like we've done in Iraq. And we need to think about, instead of eradicating the opium crops there, using it on our pharmaceutical industry, giving them an economy that they can actually hang their hat on. If we do those things, I believe that we can get out of Afghanistan in an expedited way, and I don't think it should take years and years. I think it can be done relatively quickly.
Sam?
Yeah. Our goal should be to finish the job that we started and to accomplish our objective, and that's leaving Iraq and Afghanistan as stable as is reasonable given the circumstances that they're facing. Otherwise, the lives we've lost will have been in vain. We need to make sure that we finish what we started. I want to get them home as soon as possible, but ultimately we need to make sure that we leave that situation whenever it takes us to get to that point where we've got allies in stable countries in Afghanistan and Iraq, because that is what is in our long-term best interest. It is not in our national security interest to have either of those countries be a hotbed for terrorists like the Taliban in Afghanistan. So that's why we need to finish what we started. I want our troops to come home as soon as we can once we've finished the job.
I think anyone that saw the cover of Time magazine last week and saw that beautiful girl with her nose cut off by the Taliban knows that we are up against a vicious enemy there. We're going back to the think tank. Al Robinson, founder and publisher of Het City Blog.
I'll be real quick because we don't have a lot of time. I want to make sure the other guys get a quick question in. Real quick, I'm going to be right to the point on coming up next week. There's going to be a primary. One of you guys is going to be running against Chris Murphy for the general election. I want for the Republicans out there to find out a clear difference between you three candidates. During George Bush's term in office, when he walked into office, he had a surplus. When he walked out, he had a deficit. There was a lot of spending done under Republicans, which is one of the reasons why Republicans lost the majority in Congress. Specifically, can you tell me why you feel you're the best person for the position of Congress in terms of reducing spending and getting spending under control, as opposed to your counterparts?
Lightning round. Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm 56 years old, and I have no interest in being a career politician. I am very, very upset with the direction that this country has gone in. I'm very upset that my children will not be part of the American dream in this land. I can't be bought by anybody. I'm going to be doing the right thing. I'm not afraid to say to Republicans that they did the wrong thing. During the Bush years, they spent too much money. I'm not afraid to say the truth at all times. And when I go down, I'll be going down with my principles and my moral compass, and I'll always do what I believe is right. I'll hope that the constituents agree with me, but I will always do what I believe is right. And then once this country has been changed back to what it should be, based upon the Constitution, I'm back with my children.
Justin?
Well, as a Director of Office of Military Affairs, I returned a large percentage of my budget to the Treasury, but also withheld millions of dollars in bond funding, despite pressure from the legislature to spend it unnecessarily at times. So I've actually got a track record of holding back funding despite other legislators trying to beat you over the head. I have no problem about standing my ground on this issue. I've already pledged to support a balanced budget, to fight any type of excess spending, including earmarks, and I'm going to stand by that pledge.
Sam?
I think my record speaks for itself now. I talked about it earlier, but I was the only senator and the only Republican in the General Assembly to stand up and vote no to the 2007-2009 state budget. And that was after a lot of discussions with my colleagues. I'm a team player, but at the end of the day, as I said to my leader in the Senate, if I voted yes on that budget, I might as well not even be in the legislature, because I will have been violating my core convictions as a fiscal conservative. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I pushed that red button, even though it meant I was the only one. I stood up against my party. I stood up against a governor of my own party, against a budget that I thought was wrong for Connecticut. I think that says everything I can possibly say. I don't have to talk about it. I've done it. I've done it before. I'll do it in Washington now.
Yeah, lightning round. Jim, you have the last question.
We'll make it quick, too. In a Republican debate, I haven't heard this word only once. I think Mr. Caligiuri said it. Conservative. How do you characterize your political philosophy? Would you say you're a conservative, a moderate, libertarian, Tea Party? And what do you think about the flat tax?
Give us a title.
We need
titles. Give us a title. Mark, we'll start with you really quick, because then we're closing.
I'm a fiscal conservative. I'm a social conservative. I'm supported by Tea Parties and grassroots. For instance, Independence Caucus supported me. Conservative A to Z. How's that?
Good. I'm a conservative, and you know what? Ronald Reagan, who was obviously president when I was coming up, he never had to tell people he was a conservative. He just did it. If you go back and look at his speeches, read them through, doesn't do a lot of bragging about it. He just did it. And so I'm a conservative, but I'm going to act that way most importantly.
Sam?
I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm a social conservative, and one of the strengths that I think I bring to this race is that I've been able to win as a conservative across the board in a heavily Democratic state Senate district, and I did it in 2 of the toughest election years we've ever seen for Republicans. So I'm not only a conservative, but I've proven myself to be a conservative who can appeal not just to Republicans, but to Democrats and unaffiliated voters.
Appreciate you all being here. By a draw of straws before the debate, we had the order, and we're going to have closing statements, starting with Mark, and we'll go down. You have a minute and a half for a closing statement. Mr.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I would also like to publicly thank both Justin and Sam for a tremendous, tremendous run over the last 10 months. It's been a privilege, really it has, to speak to these fellows and debate with them on the issues of the times. Basically, I have 35 years of business experience. I want to go down with that business experience and that moral compass to do what's best for this district. I believe I have the resources to do that and to take on Chris Murphy toe-to-toe. And I am absolutely convinced that should I be the nominee after Tuesday, Chris Murphy will be fired.
America's at a historic moment. We really are. And this election is going to determine the direction of this country for decades to come. To beat Chris Murphy, we're going to have to prove to the voters that they can get a fresh start. I'm the only candidate in this race with both a background in national security and economics. We are giving them the positive message about prosperity and the pathway to that that they want to hear. And this is not the year for career politicians. If you look across the country, everywhere you look, they're throwing them out and sending new people to Congress that have not held office before. So I ask you for your support on August 10th.
Sam?
Thank you, Marty, very much for this opportunity. It's been a great honor to be in the race with these gentlemen. At the end of the day, I believe I won the Republican nomination at the convention because I have the strongest record as a proven fiscal conservative, because I've got a proven record of winning as a Republican in tough environments. We're going to need a candidate with a proven ability to appeal not just to Republican voters, but to also conservative Democrats and unaffiliated. I've done it. I've done it in some very tough environments. I'm very proud to have been endorsed by the Danbury News-Times yesterday, and I'm very proud to say that I have a close affinity for Danbury and the greater Danbury area because my wife Lori and I, Lori spent her whole life here in Danbury, and this is like a second home for me.
Well, I really appreciate it very much. I wish I could vote for all 3 of you. I appreciate you taking the time coming in, facing the voters. It can't get more democratic and intense than this. So thank you for coming in, and we'll see what happens on the 10th.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate your time. Okay, right now.